It's really striking how fast smartphone tech moves, but lately, it really feels like Chinese brands have, put the pedal to the metal on battery innovation.
Yeah.
We're seeing some pretty big leaps in 2025.
Oh, absolutely. We've been digging into an article from Phone World that lays this all out, and we also looked at a transcript from another podcast segment that pretty much backs it all up. They paint a really clear picture together.
Yeah, exactly. So for everyone listening, what we want to do today is really get a handle on these big battery shifts coming from China, based on what we've found, what's driving it, and what does it actually mean for the phones we'll be carrying around.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things that really jumped out was this shift towards using silicon-based anodes in the batteries for flagship phones.
Right. And the really revolutionary part there is the density. Think about it. A typical phone battery uses graphite for the anode, right?
Yeah.
Silicon can, theoretically at least, hold way more lithium ions. So you switch to silicon, you can cram a lot more energy into the same size battery.
Okay, so same space, more juice.
Exactly. And that Phone World article really flags this as kind of the key reason we're seeing this big push for just bigger batteries overall.
A big push is right. Sounds like the new benchmark for flagships, maybe by the end of this year, is going to be around 7,000 mAh. That's quite a step up from the 6,000 mAh we sort of saw as standard in 2024.
It is, but it doesn't stop there. The article also mentions mid-range phones getting boosts too, potentially even hitting 8,000 mAh.
Wow, 8,000.
Yeah, Honor was specifically named as aiming for that. It really shows it's not just the top end. They're trying to solve that battery life problem across the board.
Okay, so let's unpack the why a bit. I mean, our fundamental use hasn't suddenly doubled, has it? What's really driving this need for such huge batteries?
Well, maybe not doubled, but it's definitely become more intense and constant. If you think about it, our phones are just central now. Work, socializing, streaming, navigation, payments, pretty much everything. And all that screen on time, all those connections, they just drain power. So naturally, people want phones that can actually last a full heavy day without needing a top-up. Less battery anxiety.
Right, that makes total sense. We rely on them more, so they need more stamina. Now, it's not just about the size, the capacity, is it? That Phone World article also really hammered home the charging side of things.
Oh, absolutely critical. Yeah. A massive battery is great, but if it takes, 4 hours to charge, that kind of defeats the purpose in some ways.
Correct.
So the expectation is these newer flagships, the ones with those next-gen chips like the MediaTek Dimensity 9500 or the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2, they'll support seriously fast charging. We're talking maybe 100 watts wired and even 50 to 80 watts wireless.
Okay, 100 watts wired, that's incredibly quick. Linking in for just, 15, 20 minutes could give you a huge chunk of power back?
Exactly. It changes how you even think about charging. Maybe you don't need to charge overnight anymore.
Yeah, could really shift habits. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and both our sources pointed this out. There's a bit of a divide, isn't there? While these Chinese brands are pushing hard on capacity and silicon, other big names like Samsung, Apple, Google, they seem to be, holding back a bit.
That's a really key point. The Phone World piece noted Apple's iPhones generally stick below 5,000 mAh.
So, yeah.
And Samsung and Google, while maybe offering a bit more in some models, they haven't really jumped on these, 7,000 mAh plus batteries or the silicon anode tech widely yet.
So why the difference? What do we think is going on there? Is it about design choices? Maybe they think they can get away with software optimization? Or are they just on a slower track?
It's probably a mix of all those things. Design is huge, right? Maybe they're prioritizing thinness and lightness over packing in the absolute biggest battery. Software optimization is definitely Apple's traditional strength, making things efficient. And yeah, different R&D cycles, different priorities. But the article did suggest, and it makes sense, that if consumer demand really shifts towards prioritizing battery life above all else,
They might have to follow suit.
they might just have to adapt, market pressure.
Okay, so let's imagine this trend continues. Bigger batteries, less worry. How does that actually change how we use our phones day to day if that little red battery icon isn't constantly looming?
Well, it could be pretty liberating, actually. Think about it. Less mental energy spent on, do I have enough charge? You might just, use those power-hungry apps more freely when you're out.
Like high-end games or video editing on the go.
Exactly. Or leaving location services on all the time for better AR or background tasks without constantly thinking, oh, this is draining my battery. It removes a layer of friction, potentially.
The podcast segment you mentioned, it named names, right? Which are specific brands are really leading this?
Yeah, it did. They called out Vivo, Oppo, Xiaomi, and especially Red Magic.
Red Magic, the gaming phone brand.
Right, and they gave examples like Vivo's next foldable, the X Fold 4 series, apparently expected to have something like a 6,365 milliamp battery. So even in complex form factors like foldables.
That's impressive. And Red Magic, they're already out there.
According to that segment, yeah, their latest apparently rocks a 7,050 milliamp battery, which, makes total sense for their audience. Gamers need that endurance.
Absolutely. Non-stop power for long sessions.
And the podcast segment noted they're doing this without making the phone ridiculously thick, which is also important.
Right. Got to keep it pocketable.
Then there was a rumor mentioned about Oppo's next big thing, the Find X8 series, maybe getting 6,000 milliamp batteries across the line. So it suggests this isn't just niche. It's becoming more mainstream, at least among these brands.
And that really contrasts with, say, Samsung. The podcast mentioned the S25 Ultra rumor, sticking with 5,000 milliamp.
Yeah, that was the suggestion. It really highlights the different philosophies at play right now.
It does. Now, the podcast also brought up Pakistan, which was interesting. How does that fit in?
Well, it highlighted how dominant Chinese brands like Infinix, Vivo, and Xiaomi are in that market, and how local manufacturing, mostly by these Chinese firms, met something like 94% of the phone demand there in 2024.
Okay, so huge market share.
Right. So in a market like that, where they're already so strong, focusing on a key consumer pain point like battery life, it's a really smart strategic move. It helps them consolidate that position.
Makes sense. It's not just tech for tech's sake. It's meeting a real demand in their key markets.
Exactly. And the podcast summed it up nicely. You get these bigger batteries, plus the efficient new chips we talked about, plus still decent designs. It all adds up to a better experience. Longer use times, smoother performance.
Looking forward, though, that Phone World article asked a pretty practical question. Is there a limit? How big can these batteries actually get before our phones just become bricks?
Yeah, that's the trade-off, isn't it? More capacity usually means more physical size, more weight. At some point, you hit diminishing returns where the extra battery life isn't worth the extra bulk.
So there's a balance to be struck.
Definitely. Manufacturers have to weigh that desire for endless battery against, basic usability and aesthetics. Maybe that silicon anode tech, as it improves, will let them push density even further without adding too much size, but there's likely still a physical limit somewhere.
So wrapping this part up, the main takeaway seems clear. If battery life is high on your list, these Chinese brands are really the ones pushing the envelope right now in 2025. It feels like a genuinely significant shift for users.
I think that's spot on. They're redefining the standard for battery capacity and charging speed. And yeah, it really could change how we interact with our phones daily, making that low battery warning feel hopefully a bit less constant.
Okay, so we've dived deep into this battery revolution, largely driven by Chinese manufacturers. It really gets you thinking, though. Seeing how quickly they've advanced battery tech, what other parts of the smartphone experience might they disrupt next? What other features or designs could see this kind of rapid game-changing innovation soon? And what might be the forces pushing those changes? Definitely some food for thought there.